Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed and part 2 of the November Q&A series. If you missed part 1, that is on the channel right now. You can go and enjoy a bunch more questions and answers from us. But for now, we've got part 2. But before we do...
Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new 12th Gen CPU contact frame by DeBauer. It's well known that the integrated loading mechanism, or ILM, of the LJ1700 sockets bends 12th Gen CPUs, leading to an uneven contact surface that reduces cooling performance. Solving this issue, the contact frame replaces the ILM, allowing for a much more even contact with the CPU's IHS and the base of your cooler, which in turn reduces operating temperatures. Installation's quick and easy, and thanks to the use of anodized aluminium, the contact frame is non-conductive. And then, for those of you who wish to further maximize contact, Thermal Grizzly now offers an optional lapping tool, so for more information, please check the link in the video description. Hi guys, the current rumor is the new 7900 XTX should perform within 20% of the 4090 at $600 US less. Do you think there's a real chance for AMD to corner the GPU market if this turns out to be accurate? Love your work. Well, thank you. Yeah, as we've talked about in the past and other questions, really that comes down to you guys, or more specifically gamers at large. If gamers flock to the 7900 series and RDNA3, then, well, it'll certainly go a long way in helping AMD corner the market. Bit of an uphill battle there. It's probably a bit of a stretch to say they can corner the market, but they could certainly claw back some market share. But whether that'll happen or not and of course we have to see how competitive other things are like ray tracing and whatnot.
And lower tier models as well from NVIDIA.
Yes.
Because they've only got a $1,600 and a $1,200 GPU. There's many other price points that they can compete at. That's
right. And really it's not so much about AMD cornering the market. It's not about AMD getting a win or having a win or winning. It's really not about that. It's about AMD. We want AMD to have a success because that means
competition.
NVIDIA has to do exactly what Tim said. They have to release lower end parts that are really competitive. And then, AMD then goes, oh, well, we needed to be more competitive and now we're going to have to adjust prices again. GPU pricing war. It's good for everyone. Obviously, we don't care who wins, whether it's AMD or NVIDIA. At the end of the day, you guys win. We win because, well, if you guys win, we win. So we want to see AMD and NVIDIA just going at it. We don't want to see either one of them dominant. We want to see GPU wars. That's what we want to see.
Yeah. I think it's highly unlikely in this specific generation that AMD can corner the market.
It's really not possible. Not possible.
Unless they were releasing a card that basically lost them money, I think there's virtually no chance they would be able to.
NVIDIA,
they could get more sales, that's for sure. Their sales numbers, generally speaking, it's at best 60-40. But more typically like 80-20 in favor of NVIDIA. Mm-hmm. So if they can get that back to a more neutral level, they'll be doing very, very well. But cornering the market, that's like years of executing better to get to that level.
Many generations. Alrighty, Tim, I reckon we can have a bit of a discussion about this one. So
right.
Some people complain about how much we drag out our answers and some people love it.
Yep.
Tough luck. Here we go. What do you think are the most balanced pairings between CPU and GPU now? It seems like even a $200 CPU can keep up with a $1,000 GPU at 1440p or greater, at least in games where increasing the FPS further actually gives a meaningful improvement. So, it used to be kind of, I suppose before the rise of esports and all that, it was a lot easier to give these answers because generally speaking, multiplayer games where it was competitive gaming was it's always been a thing, but it wasn't as significant of a thing.
It took a while for people to learn that like 300, 400, 500 FPS does give you like a significant benefit.
Yeah.
Like in the early days, it was like 120 FPS was like, whoa.
Competitive gamers have always chased high frame rates and they have always tweaked settings for that competitive advantage, but it wasn't, I guess, as prevalent, let's say. So it was the hardcore multiplayer gamers, whereas there was a bit more overlap between single player gamers and multiplayer gamers. And I'm sure there's still plenty of that today, but I'm seeing more of a divide where there's people who predominantly play multiplayer or predominantly play single player because I guess it's become so different of an experience, of a gaming experience. So regardless of whether you do or don't agree with that, whatever, the point is there are people who will largely play Apex Legends, Warzone, Overwatch, Fortnite, those sort of games. They predominantly play those. And then, which I suppose would be me, and there's players like Tim who love things like Assassin's Creed, Horizon Zero Dawn, Forbidden West, Cyberpunk.
Yeah, I played that.
All those sort of games. And for Tim to answer this question would be quite different to how I would answer that question just based on that alone. So for Tim, CPU performance isn't as important. I mean, Cyberpunk 2077 still uses quite a bit of the CPU, but it's not as extreme as what you might see in like a big Battlefield 2042 game or something like that.
But it also depends on like what tier of performance even I would be interested in, because if I'm buying like
That's
a
true.
4090 or 4080 type product, which again, it's not quite $1,000, it's a bit more than that, but those products, even at 1440p and sometimes 4K, do still require, to not run into CPU limitations, do require a pretty powerful CPU these days. You certainly couldn't get away with, first or second gen Ryzen and expect to be getting all of what you're paying for on the GPU side.
Of the budget, you would prioritize the GPU.
Yeah, 100%. Like if I was going, if I had like $1,500 to spend or $1,000 to spend, I'd be wanting to min-max the GPU as much as possible.
I guess as an example, we just saw recently in Warzone, if you're playing using the lowest quality settings at 1080p, a 6950 XT is as fast or technically faster due to overhead stuff than a 4090.
Yeah.
In that sort of game, 6800 XT is kind of a sweet spot in terms of value because it's only $500 and you're getting close to the kind of performance you would get with a 13900K out of like a 4080.
Yeah.
So you'd probably want to make sure you have that Core i9 processor and then the best GPU that you can afford to pair with that. Whereas you'd sort of go the other way. You'd be more leaning towards the Core i5, let's say, if you were to stick with Intel, but then go for more like the 4080 or whatever.
I'm not sure whether it'd be more like Core i5 versus Core i9, but more like an older generation part. Because even for a competitive gamer, like a 13600K is probably still going to give you, top tier level performance.
I was just keeping it simple, sure.
But yeah, like for me, my personal rig at the moment has a 12400F for gaming, but it has a 3090, which, people always say when we benchmark these CPUs that someone buying a 3090 wouldn't use a 12400F in their system, but I don't really need much more powerful of a CPU. And maybe if I was upgrading to a 4090, I'd consider upgrading that CPU a little bit so I can still, not be CPU bottlenecked in some titles. But yeah, I wouldn't be looking at a Core i9 part. Like it just wouldn't make sense for me to spend the $600 on that CPU. Certainly Core i5, or if I had an AM4 system or AM5, Ryzen 5 would make sense. But yeah, I certainly would be putting as much into the GPU as I possibly could.
Yeah, whereas I'd go the other way. Like
a
lot of you guys know, I mostly play games like Fortnite, a bit of Warzone recently, and Modern Warfare 2. Those games I play pretty much most of the settings minimized, like the lowest possible setting. Things like draw distance turned up, and almost always I am CPU bound. So faster CPU there. But anyway, it's basically, it's difficult to answer the question without knowing the type of games you play and stuff like that. But we're certainly at a point where generalizing, it's back to the way it was, where like your Core i5 tier of CPU is certainly powerful enough. Even the Ryzen 5, I know people complain about it being, the 7600X, for example, being 6 cores, which I do think, not because it has 6 cores it should be cheaper, just because of the performance it offers in productivity and gaming it should be cheaper. But anyway,
I think that makes sense.
One thing the industry almost as a whole talks about now that they didn't used to when there is a new GPU launch is cost per frame. I think cost per frame's always been a thing. It's just more mainstream now that there's YouTube and not tech sites.
Yeah, I'd say so. Value's always been talked about, but I think there's been moving towards better data over time. But yeah, continue with the question.
It is quite a long one here, so I will work through it. All I think of when I see cost per frame is a way for vendors to justify price increases. Okay?
Interesting.
He goes on, I feel the analysis on cost per frame in the industry has done more harm than good in how it affects overall pricing, even though the intentions have been good to help consumers make better purchasing decisions. Well, it's certainly not an industry type thing. It is definitely to make it easier to decipher the data and work out where it stands. Anyway, an example, a $1,000 GPU at 100 FPS is $10 per frame, and a new GPU with better performance at 130 FPS, but the price is $1,300, is the same value. What happens to getting a new better GPU without being gouged on price each release? What are your thoughts on this? So, I mean, we've definitely hammered GPUs in the past for offering the same cost per frame.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get where you're coming from with this question. It's definitely sort of like, if all the data is available of cost per frame, then it allows GPU vendors to just slot in their products into that current graph.
To be fair, I think they have that information before the reviewers present it.
Yeah, they would. Right. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying. Yeah. You know, they know consumers are conscious of it, so they can use their internal data to make pricing decisions. But I think
sorry, I don't mean to, but then you'd be making the assumption then that people are happy to see no improvement.
Well, that's right. It's like, if they're the same value, then you wouldn't buy it. Like, that's the answer to that question, right?
That's what that's telling you.
It's like, if you have a current product and you're thinking of upgrading and the options have the same cost per frame, why would you upgrade? Yeah. Like, unless you're upgrading to a different performance tier and spending more money, which most people aren't willing to do, then you just wouldn't upgrade. I think the reason why you want to look at cost per frame is that it should, and does most of the time, encourage GPU vendors to lower pricing to get into that better position. So if you have two vendors, and which in this case would be AMD and NVIDIA, so let's just name them AMD and NVIDIA, and you had, 6700 XT versus 3070, both around $500, both with similar cost per frame, then there's the incentive for one of those companies to lower the price to make the cost per frame better, which then you'd think would make the other company want to respond again. And it'd keep lowering just because, of general normal market factors and how these things work out, which is typically what you see, because you want that new card to come out that gives you the better spot in the chart. If it's the same cost per frame, doesn't give you a better spot in the chart. It gives you the same spot, and people destroy you in the reviews. So,
which is what we saw with the 4080 and the 4090.
Yeah, and I think, if there was this general thought that people are willing to buy products because they have the same value, then yes, having those cost per frame charts would allow vendors to just easily slot in cards of the same value. But I don't think people make those upgrading decisions. It's always like, well, I've got my card for the past 5 years or whatever. I don't want the same value GPU. That makes no sense. Well, I want 50% better or 30% better.
That's right. And the 4080 and the 4090 are of the same generation.
Yeah.
And it's still not impressive. The 4080 should be noticeably better. Well, I don't know, noticeably is probably not the right word, but should be substantially better in terms of cost per frame because it has less VRAM. It's less impressive at 4K. The ray tracing performance isn't as impressive. It's not as an impressive product. So not only do you want to be paying $400 less, you want to be getting more value at that price point. And generally, that's the way it's always been. Like, the lower end cards offer more value, and the more you got, you're paying more of a premium for that extra performance. Yeah. But when that's not the case, it's like, well, I might as well just pay the extra $400.
Yeah, I mean, there's many issues with the 4080, but obviously people had the opportunity to buy 3090s and 3090 Ti's for around $1,000 for several months. And yes, the 4080 is faster than those GPUs, but it's not substantially faster. If you had a 3090 Ti or 3090, you probably wouldn't consider buying a 4080 for $1,200. And that's the main issue, right? It's that the cost per frame was so similar to those cards that you had access to that all those buyers that already had about $1,000 to spend wouldn't upgrade. Makes no sense.
I think a good example of this is probably the Radeon RX 6600 XT review.
Yeah.
The cost per frame there that was not good. Crypto boom and all of that, of course. But that's a good example where we use the cost per frame to analyze it and compare it to a previous generation and be like, this isn't great.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, hopefully we will see more. We're in this position right now where the RTX 40 series has come out with 2 super high-end GPUs, and the cost per frame's not looking great, and people are sort of panicking a little bit about, is cost per frame causing these issues? But I think once we see the more sensible choices that people are buying, that you'll see much stronger competition in cost per frame, because people do not upgrade for the same value. It just doesn't happen.
I see where you're coming from with the question as well. It does make sense, but I also strongly disagree. But I can see how you've come to that conclusion.
The emphasis seems to be on the fact that AMD will support AM5 for at least the next 2 generations. I was wondering if you thought that includes making the next 2 generations work on 600 series chipsets though. Do you think it will go in a similar way to the insane support that was provided for 300 series chipsets, or is AMD likely to support motherboard manufacturers a bit more and force us to get a new motherboard for 9000 series CPUs, even though it still fits in an AM5 socket?
Well, they've promised what seems like the next 2 generations.
Because up to 2025, so
and
it's borderline on that second gen, but we'll see.
I mean, it'd be weird if they didn't. But anyway, I think the answer is that the 600 series boards that we have now will support those next few generations. It's sort of a grey area because they haven't said that exactly, but they've given a time frame to when it will be supported. What I hope is they learnt their lesson last time, which, I mean, it seems like they did because they reverted pretty quickly on the decision to axe support across AM4, and they actually improved it as time went on and found ways to go about doing that. It went from impossible, couldn't be done, to everyone got upset, and now it's done. So I could foresee a situation where 600 series boards get support maybe 3 months after a product's launched, which I don't really have a problem with, because normally you don't get the most bang for your buck buying a CPU straight away. And it is important that the new platforms or new chipsets that come out are properly supported and all the bugs are ironed out before they roll that out across all boards. I think as long as that's made clear, but it is a bit of a grey area. As we've said, if 2 platforms are pretty well equal in all other, performance, price, features for the most part, but one has this promised platform longevity, then that's a reason to buy it, but it's not the reason to buy it. So we're not saying buy AM5 because AMD's made these promises. It's just, we know Raptor Lake has no future. That's it. It's like, so if you invest in that platform, that's it. It's still a great platform. There's still very powerful CPUs. They're still certainly worth buying. But if you're tossing up between a 7600X and a 3600K, and they're similar for gaming performance, but maybe right now I think the 7600X is probably slightly better value. Was that your analysis, or still very similar?
DDR5 versus DDR5, it was like slightly better in favor of AMD, and if you're going for DDR4 on the Intel side, it was like pretty similar.
Yeah, so they're very similar. Do you want productivity? Go the Core i5 if that's the case, or are you just gaming? In which case it's like it doesn't really matter, but one of them has that platform support. So anyway, we've talked about this one a lot. Anything else?
I think consumers would be pretty upset if at current motherboard prices that the 600 series boards were not supported well into the future, because they are expensive and people are not going to forget spending like $300, $400 on a board.
I guess the only promise I can make to you guys is, while it is a gamble and we can't actually promise what AMD will do, all I can promise you is that we will hammer AMD, like absolutely hammer them if they don't at least, honor what they've promised and really what they've hinted at, given what the roadmaps are available.
It'd be pretty misleading, in my opinion, if it was like the first generation of AM5 products where you can only buy 600 series boards, and they're saying, we'll support this socket for 5 years. And then later down the track, they pull a technicality and like, well, we didn't say 600 series boards, we said AM5 socket, so we've just burnt all of you customers, even though that's, I know why they've said it the way they've said it, because it does give them an out if something goes wrong. But I think it's very much the implication that people have inferred that they mean these boards that people are buying now. I think that's a very fair assumption. I think it would be misleading if that wasn't the case.
We will absolutely hammer them if that's not the case. That's all I can promise you, just as we hammered them on the 400 series and lowered losing support. We dedicated a video to that. We called them out. we backed the community on that one, and they changed it. We weren't buying the whole BS about the BIOSes and it not being technically possible and all that. We reached out to various different parties. You can go watch that video. We knew it was possible. We knew they could do it, and we didn't give them an inch. We said that they have to revert.
And now there's even more evidence that you can point to, being like, technical issues. Well, you said that last time, and that was a lie.
Yep.
So,
well, I mean, I've got a video where we tested the 5800X 3D on a whole heap of B350 boards, like some of the garbage B350 boards as well, and it worked really well. Like great performance, very similar to like X570S boards.
Yep.
Too many bloody. Anyway, so yeah, that's really the best promise we can make to you guys, that we will definitely go after AMD, and AMD know that. So hopefully it all goes smoothly and they do a good job. All right, Tim, get your wallet ready. Has the effectiveness of voting with your wallet, you're meant to help there, to encourage manufacturers to produce better value products or lower prices, has that changed over time? So Zen 4 versus Raptor Lake for value. Has it changed over time? So like,
I think there could be a perception that it's changed over time, because we've just gone through 2 years of extreme demand. So the whole like voting with your feet type thing doesn't really work too much when you're outvoted by the giant surge of people who are new to PC gaming or whatever, and the giant surge of mining or whatever. Like, it's very difficult to vote with your wallet when you're outvoted easily by other people. Whereas I think now we're starting to see voting with your wallet becoming more effective. Certainly with AMD cutting prices for Zen 4 so quickly for holiday sales and things like that.
Maybe I'm getting a bit off base here, but my take on this has always been sort of no, but also yes. I think especially prior to YouTube, so when tech sites were more of a niche computer nerd type forum thing, people would just it was all about advertising on TV, radio, billboards, or there was less technical information. There was less consumer focused information on the products. It was really one marketing department versus another marketing department. Whereas with the rise of stuff like YouTube, people are actually getting educated on their buying decisions with all the products we talk about. And that's why I've often talked about, Linus Tech Tips comes up as there'll be some new product launch and they had a slightly different take to someone else, and there's a lot of controversy and all that sort of stuff. But I've always maintained that I feel like someone like Linus Tech Tips, that huge YouTube channel, is of net benefit to the whole industry, because I think by and large they do a pretty good job. But for people who want to do further research, it's sort of like a gateway to people like Gamers Nexus or us or whoever else. It makes building your computer and researching components and knowing what a graphics card is opposed to a CPU or whatever a bit more mainstream.
Yeah, exactly. Like, tech sites were always there that you could read if you knew about them.
Yeah.
And you could find the information if you knew. But the rise of YouTube pushed that into the mainstream. It made it so much more accessible.
Yeah, and the barrier to entry, if that's
it's a lot lower now.
Yeah, and I don't mean necessarily for YouTubers. I mean for readers.
Yeah, because communications.
There was a lot of sort of lingo and terminology that people didn't understand, and again, like someone like a Linus Tech Tips, they avoid a lot of that and make it easier to understand. They do a lot of like Tech Quickie and stuff like that, where I explain a lot of what those things are. So it just makes it, it's entertaining and educational at the same time. And then if you want to learn more, you go over to Steve from Gamers Nexus, and he'll hit you with both barrels, and then then you're in for it. You're in the deep end then. But I think that's I think that's where the voting with your wallet has become more powerful, because a lot of people now are more on the same page.
When products are bad, I think we see now more than ever that those products do not sell.
Definitely.
They are just dead. So, at least to a much more significant degree than it was previously. But I can see where, again, it's one of these questions where I can see where you're coming from, because it certainly has felt like since 2020 to maybe halfway through this year, that it felt like a lot of the complaints about pricing and things were having no impact. Like, people were massively complaining about GPU pricing in particular, and sort of a lot of people were voting with their wallet by not buying those cards, but then miners were just coming in and completely eroding all that work that supposedly voting with your wallet was doing. So I can 100% see where this has come from, but I think, by creators educating people more over time, that voting with your wallet can become more powerful and has over time. I think that's probably how it's gone. I would expect that from now throughout the next couple of years until there's some other, who knows what crisis will happen next for things to go badly again. I think that, we will see a return of, products that are good value selling like absolute hotcakes, and things that aren't as much really sitting on shelves for quite a while.
Okay, with all the controversy around GPU power cables of late, why are we not seeing cards with power sockets more logically situated, so the power inputs, such as the side or bottom of the card, as an example? So, I've actually gone and grabbed the smallest graphics card I could find. Just need like a scraping sound effect as I drag it over here. So this is where the controversial power connector is on the RTX 4090 Aorus Master. So I guess the question was the back is one of them. Would that be the back?
I would say that would be the side. Yeah, and the options they produced were what, side and bottom? So the bottom would be...
They definitely couldn't have... Okay, so if for some reason... I would call that, I guess, the bottom of the card.
Yep.
Can't have a connector there, obviously, because you're hard up against the motherboard and potentially the...
Yeah, I guess I think it was maybe if you just happen to have like a cable management, like the card's so long that maybe if you had a cable management hole there, you could plug it directly in, but then you're running the risk of that not being the case. So that's why they would never put it there.
Right. So, there's that. The back of the card, which is much more accessible, but a similar issue because often cases finish like somewhere here.
Especially on a card of that size.
Yep, having it go in there is difficult. The back plate, not super practical for...
I think if it was sticking up here that way and you plug the cable in like that, wouldn't that make sense? That's probably as good of an option as where it is now. Because here you run into the issue of it butting right up against the door of your case, whereas here it's free.
Yes.
But it's difficult to integrate, obviously.
Yeah, because cards vary in length, having one that goes through the back plate is difficult for things like compatibility with CPU cores and stuff like that.
If it was there, that would not be good. But if it was here, you'd probably be fine.
Sure. It'd be a custom job.
It would be a custom because the PCB ends there on this card.
Yes. So really, here is the best for really, that connector would be probably better if it was back here, but that requires a lot of wiring and stuff, and not super practical if you want to have this big open bit.
Yeah.
There's ways to do it. You could also extend the PCB and all that sort of stuff, but this is just easier and cheaper, so they do it that way. But basically, to answer the question, it comes down to compatibility, because there are various cases and things that this can be installed in, and that works with pretty much every single scenario, or has the greatest chance of not having any compatibility issues.
Yep.
So basically, compatibility is your answer. But for specific configurations and cases, there might work better. There might work better.
They were there on the EVGA 2060.
I think the EVGA model might have them there as well.
Yeah.
The unrelleased EVGA.
But the FE 2060s,
there's been the
shorter ones. Yeah,
sure. There's been plenty of cards that have had them at the rear end. And again, if it's a shorter card, like if it finishes where the PCB finishes, that would work in pretty much every case. Mini ITX might be the only potential issue there, but that can be a potential issue for Mini ITX because that's just the nature of Mini ITX. So anyway, I think we've answered that one.
Yep.
I'm going to move this away.
Do you think FSR3 frame generation will require specialized hardware like DLSS 3? If AMD manages to pull off a frame gen technique that works well on all GPUs, do you think they will choose to make an open technology like they've done with FSR 1 and 2 in the past? Would it make sense for them to keep it exclusive to AMD cards as a selling point? Also, do you believe a more classic algorithmic approach to frame generation could ever compete with the AI-based DLSS 3 if AMD decides to go that route like they have done with upscaling? Lots of stuff in this question. Lots of things. So
sit back and relax, I think.
Yeah, I think, you know, when it comes to like open technologies and making it or exclusive to AMD, very unlikely they would do that because they're not the market leader. It doesn't make sense for them to have exclusive features, especially if it's just mirroring a feature that your competitor has. If AMD was first to frame generation, then maybe you'd make it exclusive, saying like, we're the only ones with this technology. But because NVIDIA's already got it, are people realistically going to buy a card for AMD's frame gen over NVIDIA's frame gen? Probably not. Whereas again, if they had some new cool other feature, then maybe they'd make it exclusive. So yeah, I think for all that sort of stuff, they probably will go down more the FSR 1 and 2 routes of making it more open and trying to make it work on as many GPUs as possible. I think they've even said as much in some of their interviews that they're sort of trying to do that approach. Mm-hmm. Don't quote me on that because I've only seen bits and pieces of their RDNA3 interviews, but with various outlets. But
it's on video cards already.
Probably. So yeah, don't think it will require specialized hardware necessarily. They'll probably try accelerate it as much as they can on their own GPUs because, of course, that's probably what you would do. The interesting part, though, will be whether if they go algorithmic or AI-based. I think we've seen with DLSS and even XeSS as well, specifically on Intel GPUs, should mention specifically on Intel GPUs, that the AI-based approach does produce better results. DLSS and XeSS, the Intel version, look better than FSR2, generally speaking, and they typically run just as well in terms of performance because of the acceleration aspect. So, you know, if they decide to go with the algorithmic approach, it'd have to be pretty good. Mm-hmm. I know they're continuing to improve FSR. You know, all these companies are trying to improve these techniques. But it certainly makes it more challenging when you go the algorithmic approach, considering Intel was just able to make XeSS straight out of the block. AI looks pretty good on their cards. So, yeah, I'd hope they would go AI-based. I don't expect them to because they haven't done that with FSR2 to this point. You'd think the next step would be maybe make FSR AI first, like FSR 2.5, make that AI or something. I don't know. But, yeah, it'd be interesting to see how good they can get with an algorithmic approach. DLSS 3 certainly has a lot of visual issues and artifacts. So again, maybe they could get away with it not being AI. We'll have to wait and see on that one. There's certainly a lot of things they could do there. So it doesn't sound like it's coming for a while though. So they've got plenty of time to work on it. All right. And that does us for part 2 of the Q&A series. There have been so many questions that it's looking likely that there will be a part 3 on the channel as well. I think this month there's been, just so many great questions from you guys, which it's understandable. There's been a lot of things happening in this month, lots of product releases and stuff to cover. So really appreciate all the questions from the YouTube community and also our Discord community, which you gain access to if you're a Hardware Unboxed member. Sorry, what else
remember, is there? If you remember.
Yep.
Just remember, don't forget if you remember, because you won't get access to the cool things like the Discord server, behind the scenes content, Q&As, and that's live stream. Did I say live stream? I think I've saved this, Tim. I think I saved it.
Yeah. There was a bit dicey in the middle there where you went off the rails a little bit, but you brought it back.
I went off the rails.
Yeah. I'll blame you for that one.
That was all right. You very successfully shifted blame there. I'll hand that too.
That's pretty good. Anyway, I think that's pretty much it for this one. I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve. See you next time.